Hello and welcome back, everybody, to the Devy Dojo. And you know that when you hear that music, it's time to enter the dojo. And look, man, all that work, Chris, all that prep that we did to get to this moment, it's finally here. It's arrived. The NFL draft has concluded. All 7 rounds are in. And at the end of it, Chris, I don't know about you, but I was left a little wanting. It felt like this was a class that we early on had identified as one that was lacking true depth. And I think that some of the few guys, for me at least, that I was excited about, that I thought could be steals in later rounds, man, they just got body bagged by these landing spots. So my overall thoughts on the class, just right off the rip, man, disappointing. How about you, Chris? What are your initial thoughts?
Yeah, extremely disappointing because, we identified this class as one with a decent bit of wide receiver depth and with some decent tight end depth as well. But because of the way that the draft shook out, the wide receivers, even the ones that we had high hopes for that were drafted fairly early, kind of got body bagged by some of these teams double dipping at the position. The landing spots weren't great. The tight end situation was brutal with all of those guys going early that were just not even on our radar for fantasy. All these run blocking guys, these guys with names that we haven't really even discussed on the Devy Dojo because they didn't seem very fantasy relevant. And honestly, they probably still aren't. So a lot of those pass catching upside tight ends got pushed down the draft, or in some cases didn't even get drafted at all. So overall, it's pretty brutal out here. I came away from day one thinking, okay, this isn't great, but there's at least, the top like 8 or so picks, it seemed like had a little bit of value there. There was still some solidified value after day one, and that kind of just changed in the rest of the draft. I'm at the point now where maybe 4 or 5 of the top picks in the draft I'm excited about. And then if I have a pick from like 106 on, I'm scared, man. I don't want to take these guys. I saw a tweet from JJ Zachariason yesterday that was like, hey, if you're into dynasty fantasy football, you could either do your rookie draft this year or you could just punch yourself in the groin for 10 straight minutes. And that's really what it feels like. That was the perfect way to sum it up.
Yeah, big shot to the nuts, man. And it hurt just as bad, I think, watching the draft play out in real time. I think all of us in the Discord were just equally as disappointed, just talking about like, man, like I wasn't expecting the greatest, right? We're always looking ahead, looking at 2027. And in comparison, we knew that it wasn't going to be as good, but just, man, like you said, the top 5 picks feel solidified in your rookie drafts. And after that, that's when the draft begins. So I'm excited to get into this though, Chris. We are going to go down and break down the first round in its entirety, and then talk about some of the fantasy relevant guys after that. And just kind of give our outlooks and projections and what these landing spots really mean. So let's hop right into it, Chris. Right off the rip, first overall pick in the NFL draft, to no one's surprise, was Fernando Mendoza going to the Las Vegas Raiders. He pairs with Clint Kubiak now there. And what I do like about his long-term outlook is he's going to be able to sit behind Kirk Cousins. So I don't know how much burn he's going to get this season, but he gets a year to really digest the system, learn from a true pro. And then as they continue to build the team around him, they still have some picks in 2027. I don't expect them to be that good. And in that class, maybe they can pair him up with a true alpha wide receiver.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Mendoza is a guy who I think I love because the landing spot, it seems like they're doing what they can to help him out a little bit. He's got a little bit of weapons there. As you mentioned, it'd be nice to see a little bit more on the wide receiver end. But at this point, with Clint Kubiak, they do have some sneaky talent there. Like they have Jack Beck from last year, who I think could slot right into that like JJ or JSN type role that Clint Kubiak was using last year. So obviously not the same level of talent as JSN, but if he can get that volume, he can show us what he can do. He was a guy who I was pretty high on last year. I'm excited for Mendoza because I think there's a sneaky bit of talent around him, and I think that they're going to set him up to succeed pretty early. Now, the real question is he going to start right off the bat, right? Because Kirk Cousins obviously signed there. There's a little bit of talk of maybe Kirk is going there to start the year as the starter, potentially wait for Mendoza to get up to speed. We're going to have to monitor that a little bit in training camp, but that doesn't really knock him as far as being an early pick in your Superflex drafts. He's still got a lot of talent. There's a range of outcomes, different opinions as far as some people are saying he's one of the best prospects we've seen since Trevor Lawrence and Joe Burrow. For me, he's not quite that level of a talent, but I do think he's solidified as a QB2 with some upside on a week-to-week basis. So I think this was a decent landing spot for him. Overall, I kind of liked what the Raiders did in this draft class, and I think that the offense is going to be a little bit exciting moving forward. It's not your same old Raiders.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's a good scheme fit too. He's going to be asked to do a few different things than he did in college. I think they're going to implement some of the RPO stuff that he's familiar with, but in a Clint Kubiak offense, you're going to have to be under center. So that's going to be a little bit of a transition for him. But moving right along, man, the Cardinals did the unthinkable, the thing that had been rumored leading up to the draft, but I don't think any of us really thought would happen. The Arizona Cardinals at number 3 overall selected Jeremiyah Love. And look, this is a landing spot that at first glance, it seems like a really crowded room, right? You have James Conner, Tyler Algier that just signed. They still have Trey Benson there, but I'm looking at it, man. James Conner is older, coming off another injury. Algier signed, a contract, but he got body bagged again, just like he did in Atlanta when they drafted Bijan. Kind of the same situation. Trey Benson hasn't been able to stay healthy, so it's really not as crowded as it first appears. And I know a lot of people were down on the landing spot. I think that I was too initially, but in looking at it and how Mike LaFleur wants to attack, it's the same thing. It's the same type of offense that has been running rampant in the NFL, right? With the Shanahan and the McVays type of thing, the outside zone West Coast offense type of system. And I think that Jeremiyah Love profiles to just really, he could operate in any system, but it's going to highlight his strengths. And the thing that I loved the most, Chris, was that Mike LaFleur, if you look at his coaching background, in Breece Hall's rookie season for the Jets, when he was calling plays there, in 7 games before Breece Hall went down with an injury, he had 31 targets. So I think that the type of talent that Love is, he's going to be that versatile chess piece, right? He's going to get the bulk of carries. He's going to get a lot of receptions in a pro-style offense that's really probably still going to be funneled through Trey McBride in the passing game. And then you have Jeremiyah Love eating on the ground. So I don't hate it as much as a lot of people do. Would I have preferred him to go somewhere else? Yeah, I think so. But drafted 3rd overall, the highest running back taken in the NFL draft since your Saquon Barkley.
Yeah, I mean, as far as real life goes, this is a terrible pick, right? If you're a Cardinals fan, you're probably a little upset about this. Obviously, he's an electric talent. He's one of the better running backs we've seen coming out of college recently. So it's exciting because no matter where he goes, you think he's going to command a good share of the backfield. But as a rookie, I don't have super, super high hopes for him. So he's kind of, he's still the 101, but it put a little bit of a dampener on his overall value, I think, because I think James Conner was signed to a new deal. I think October last year, it was like mid-season. They signed him to a new deal. They like James Conner. Obviously, they signed Tyler Algier, and us Algier truthers are very sad about this whole situation here. And then you mentioned Trey Benson. I don't think all 4 of these guys are going to be in the same room come September. There's no chance that one of these guys doesn't get cut at some point. This is a whole new coaching staff. There's no way that they're going to keep all of these guys just sitting on the bench. So you might get lucky and maybe Trey Benson ends up somewhere else. I think he's probably cooked forever at this point, but you never know. He could find a decent landing spot elsewhere. Somebody might trade for him in training camp. Who knows? I think that most likely what happens is we see Love get a lot of those touches, especially in the middle of the field, decent receiving work, and they're going to put James Conner in closer to the red zone. So he might be a little bit more of a touchdown vulture, which is fine for him. He might still have a little bit of value in fantasy, but yeah, I don't know that that's going to be great for Love, especially this year. But the ceiling's still there, and this is a great long-term play for him. This is a situation in Arizona where we don't expect this offense to get really, really good, really, really fast. But long-term, there's still a lot of pieces there. So I think he's going to be a major part of that moving forward. So the ceiling is still extremely high. It's just not the greatest landing spot as far as rookie production goes.
Yeah, and that's always the concern when you have a high-end elite talent, right? The best players are going to go to the worst teams. So this is another situation where it's just, I'm not going to overthink and galaxy brain this. It's still Jeremiyah Love. He's still the unquestioned 101 in dynasty rookie drafts. In fact, I had my first draft yesterday, immediately after the NFL draft, and with confidence, I took Jeremiyah Love at 101. But in that draft, at the 102, we saw Carnell Tate go in my draft, and that's where he went in the NFL draft. He went immediately after Jeremiyah Love, selected 4th overall by the Tennessee Titans, a team that was rumored to be very interested in Jeremiyah Love. I think that if he had fallen, that would have been the pick, but I love this for the Titans, man. This is the highest drafted wide receiver in Tennessee Titan history. Carnell Tate going there, and he's going to pair up with Brian Daboll, the new offensive coordinator. And I love this for Cam Ward. I love this for Tennessee Titans fans. He immediately profiles as the wide receiver one in that system. And one thing I know about a Brian Daboll offense is that he likes to funnel the targets to his primary wide receiver. You could go back to his time at Buffalo with Stephon Diggs. You could go to Malik Neighbors' rookie season. He's going to get these guys involved. And I said in my evaluation of Carnell Tate for the FSA and rookie guide that Carnell Tate, I believed, could be a better pro than he was in college, playing second fiddle or a vertical complement to Jeremiah Smith. Now he gets to be the guy. He gets to work more in intermediate stuff and in the middle of the field. And I love it, man. We talked about him being a contested catch machine with those strong hands. Cam Ward's going to be running around trying to make some magic, and he's going to be able to throw it up to Carnell Tate now. Just looking at that wide receiver room now, it looks vastly improved. With Carnell Tate there, he can take over the X. You can have Calvin Ridley slide into the Z. They have Wan'Dale Robinson coming from the Giants too, of course, who has some familiarity with Brian Daboll too. So just looking at it from that end, zoomed out view, Tennessee Titans look like they're in a much better position to make Cam Ward not only successful in the NFL, but be much more fantasy relevant. I think that he's a good candidate for a year two bump. But yes, very excited about Carnell Tate in Tennessee.
Yeah, this was a fantastic spot for him to land. And I just want to pat myself on the back and do a little bit of a victory lap because I feel like I've been the guy who's been highest on Tate dating back to last August. So if you were an early adopter of the Devy Dojo back when we first started last summer, I've been pounding the table for this guy for a while, and it seems like everybody's finally caught up. And obviously the NFL did too because he went 104. This is an opportunity now for Cam Ward to succeed. He's going to have a much better cast around him. And I love my boy Alec Iomanner. So I'm a little bit sad for him, but this is great for Cam Ward's long-term growth. Cam Ward is a guy who I feel like is still a bit of a value. He's a little bit underrated because of that rookie season in dynasty formats. But Carnell Tate is a fantastic wide receiver that can go out there on the outside and be a nice deep threat for him and do a little bit across the middle as well. And we still have Wan'Dale Robinson in the slot as well. And obviously, like you said, he's got a background with Brian Daboll as well. So I think he's been a bit of a sleeper, a guy that people have been suggesting to target this offseason. I still think that's the case. We projected a lot of volume for him, and that's obviously going to go down, but he's still going to be that slot safety valve for Cam Ward. I think there's still going to be a decent amount of opportunity for him. I expect big things out of this offense this year. They're going to step up a little bit with Daboll there. So I like overall what's going on down there, and I love this Carnell Tate pick for the Tennessee Titans.
Yeah, absolutely. We're in lockstep with that. You said very early on, don't overthink it. Just take the Ohio State wide receiver and Carnell Tate. And look, if Carnell Tate went number 4 overall in this draft, looking ahead to 2027, man, where's Jeremiah Smith going to go?
Yeah.
I mean,
top 5 for sure, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. Like let's book it. But moving on to another really talented wide receiver that we were, of course, in on very early. The New Orleans Saints at pick number 8 in the first round selected Jordyn Tyson. Hashtag Chris, the Cardman's guy, right? This is somebody that we were both in on. I think throughout the season, my bias caught a hold of me. I slated him as, in the same tier as Carnell Tate and Makai Lemon. Structure them however you want. I said the draft would determine the order that you should take them in dynasty rookie drafts. And look, it came out to the Saints in an ascending offense with Kellen Moore calling the plays. Tyler Shuck looked really good to close the season last year. And now they're starting to build that room around him. So pretty excited about this too. You've said it from the onset, Chris. This is a guy that you were targeting because you believed that his ceiling was the highest, which I absolutely agree with. And look, he was injured a little bit throughout the process again, but very late into this process leading up to the draft, he had his pro day. There were some viral clips going out there with his route running, and he really, really must have impressed teams with his route running. And we just know, this dude's a dog. He's a competitor. He's going to lay his body on the line to go make a catch, sometimes to his detriment. So I hope that he can just be a little smarter in kind of how he lands and attacks the ball in the air. Just keep your body right, man. Stay healthy, because that's really the only thing that's going to prevent him from being able to be successful in the NFL is his health, right? Can he stay healthy in the NFL? Taking those big hits over the middle, we shall see. But his talent, man, is so much fun. And I do really like this fit, Chris. But this was one of your guys throughout this process, so I'm going to let you talk about Jordyn Tyson here.
Yeah, he's fantastic. I love his route running. I love his overall ceiling. Like I said, he was my wide receiver one just because I could project him to have the most elite level of talent and end up being a long-term dynasty wide receiver one. A bit disappointing that he's in the same room as Chris Olave, but the real question is, again, health. And Olave's health obviously hasn't been great too, which could be good or bad for Jordyn Tyson because there's a chance that come week 4 or 5, he's just the only wide receiver in the room that's still healthy. Or there's a chance that they both get hurt and you have no idea what's going on down there at that point. And I think that the Saints know that because they did take some other wide receivers later in this draft. I think they drafted 2 or 3 more in this draft just to get a little bit more depth in that room that needed a little bit of it. But I love the pairing with Olave because Tyson's biggest knock has been yards after the catch. He doesn't really go after it, because he is making some of those highlight catches. He knows how to go up there and get the ball, but that doesn't mean you're always landing in a position where you can get a lot of extra yardage. So I think pairing him with Olave gives a little bit more of a dynamic 1-2 punch in that room. And Tyler Shuck, man, it's like wheels up for him. He's absolutely taking a boost. Shout out to our boy Rocco. Rocco's a New Orleans Saints fan. He loves Shuck. He's been saying he's one of the better values, and I agree with that. I think I'm at the point now, based on the way this draft went, that I'd easily trade a late first for Tyler Shuck at this point if I have a quarterback needy dynasty team. But Jordyn Tyson, man, just good landing spot. We've seen Kellen Moore support 2 stellar wide receivers before in Philadelphia with A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith. So it feels very much like that at this point. These are both 2 high-end wide receiver talents in Olave and Tyson that I think can both eat in this offense. So I'm very excited for this landing spot. Best possible outcome, top 10 draft capital for Tyson. Great landing spot with a good quarterback and a good offensive coach. So I'm pretty happy about this.
Yeah, how can you not, man? Tyler Shuck to the moon right now. Excellent draft. Health is going to be a question for all of those top end guys on the offense. Of course, Tyler Shuck has the history, Olave and Jordyn Tyson. But man, if it all works out and it goes according to plan, I like it. And like you said, the time to buy Tyler Shuck was a month ago. I think the price of the brick just went up a little bit. But moving on, man, this was the biggest surprise of the draft. Not necessarily that he went in the first round. I think it was how high he went. And of course, I'm talking about the Rams selection, Ty Simpson, quarterback out of Alabama. They took him 13th overall in the draft. Now, for a team that was in the NFC Championship game, a game away from the Super Bowl, ready to win now with Matthew Stafford probably in his final year, this was a chance for them to really add a piece that could help now. So I think that was the surprising part of it. I don't mind the idea of getting a guy like Ty Simpson to develop behind Matthew Stafford. It's just really about how high they selected him. And I like some of the mental traits of Ty Simpson. I think he has functional mobility in the pocket, but again, the ability to process post snap for a guy with limited amount of starts was impressive, especially early on in the season, before the back injury and things like that. But it's a heavy and scary bet to make with quarterbacks of this profile with these limited amount of starts. And so it's just kind of confusing from a process standpoint of why you would take a guy like this so high. And of course, the post-draft interviews with Sean McVay, the body language surrounding him, it looked like it could potentially be one of those situations where the general manager and the head coach weren't on the same page for this pick. So, I mean, I kind of like it, but I mean, if I'm sitting there at 107, 108 in dynasty rookie drafts, I think I'm just fading quarterback entirely if I miss out on Mendoza, and I'm probably going to select somebody else. I know some people are very high just because of the landing spot, but I don't know if I trust the talent enough to just completely let the draft capital outweigh my evaluation.
Yeah, he's going to settle in at an ADP that I don't think I'm willing to take, especially for a guy that is going to sit for an entire year. And I hated this pick. This is a team that it was very close to going to a Super Bowl, right? The Rams have Super Bowl aspirations. The goal is to build the best team that can win now around Matt Stafford. And we've seen them do that for years. That's what they did the last time they won the Super Bowl, was just absolutely annihilate their draft capital, get the best team around the veterans there, and make their way to a Super Bowl championship. So you would have liked to see them do literally anything else with the 13th overall pick. I do think, though, when I'm like playing a little bit of mind games, they may have saved the Steelers from themselves, because I feel like if any team was going to overdraft Ty Simpson in the first round, it was going to be Pittsburgh. And Pittsburgh, we already saw them, we'll talk about here shortly, get cucked by the Eagles because they wanted Makai Lemon. I think they might have gotten cucked by the Rams too. I think they might have thought, hey, in a Kenny Pickett-like scenario, Ty Simpson might be there for them in the early 20s, and they could take their quarterback of the future, probably getting Aaron Rodgers back for another year and let him sit. And that might have been a good opportunity for him as well. Long-term, you prefer the Rams as a landing spot for Ty Simpson if you're a believer. I'm not a big believer. I think he's more like a maybe second or third round talent at best if you're willing to reach. But he's going to have a great opportunity here to learn from Sean McVay, to learn from Matt Stafford, and potentially have some ceiling. I just don't know that I'm willing to spend high-end first-round draft capital on him to just ride the pine on my fantasy roster for a while.
Then at 16th overall, Chris, we had the Jets take the first tight end off the board, and of course that's Kenyon Sadiq out of Oregon. This is a landing spot that I'm not too sure of, Chris, so I'm interested to hear your thoughts. Of course, we like the talent of Kenyon Sadiq. He's an athletic freak, a mismatch out there, but the Jets drafted a lot of offensive pieces in this draft, and suddenly, this room, and we're not sure how it's going to all play out, but it's looking like a pretty crowded room in terms of overall targets. But if you just want to take a bet on the talent, I love this, man. First round draft capital. He absolutely killed the combine. We know that in the Oregon offense, they don't pass the ball too much. They're a very run heavy team. They had a literal 3-headed monster running back rotation last year. And then Dante Moore, he passed to the outside more so than in the middle of the field. But when he was able to get those targets and then when he was able to go off, he showed what a mismatch he could be. So it's very possible that from a receiving standpoint in the NFL, he could be producing much, much more than he was in college. I think for me personally, I like to take a tight end that comes after him as more of a long-term play, just because I like the environment a little more. But I know that you were very in on Sadiq again. This was one of your guys, I believe, in the profile for tight ends. I could be wrong on that, but just go ahead and give me your thoughts on Kenyon Sadiq to the New York Jets at 13th overall. 16th overall.
He was my tight end one based purely on the value standpoint where he projected him to go. And obviously Kenyon Sadiq did go 16th overall to the Jets. So I think because of the draft capital that we expected out of him, I did write up his rookie guide profile. I'm with you. I think Stowers was kind of closing in. It was very tight between him and Sadiq for tight end one for me. And this is very clearly the tight end one at this point for fantasy purposes because of the landing spot. But again, muddled, right? I think after day one, even right when he was drafted, you're thinking this is fine. You take him at 106 and tight end premium. And then just a few picks later, they took Omar Cooper, which kind of muddles the target space a little bit more with the Jets. So this is, again, a long-term play. I know we expect a lot of these rookie tight ends to produce off the bat because we've seen it happen year after year. But Sadiq is going to be more of he'll chip in here and there. He might get you some weeks, but you're going to have to project him long-term with the Jets because Geno Smith is there right now. He's obviously not the long-term answer at quarterback in New York. Kenyon, I think, does it really well as far as receiving. He absolutely blew away the combine, obviously setting records for tight end with his speed, breaking the 4.3 marks there. But I don't know that I love it overall just because Mason Taylor's there, who is also a good pass catcher. I know that there's a lot of teams running 12 personnel these days, so it's not the end of the world. But it's just like this was a guy that could have saved the tight end position in Kenyon Sadiq, and now he's not there, right? Tight end is just such a brutal thing to play on a week-to-week basis in fantasy football right now. And we were hoping that he'd get somewhere where we could plug and play him as a tight end one, long-term. And it doesn't necessarily seem like that might be the case at this point. So again, he's in that range of picks where I'm not sure what I'm going to take. It's just kind of depending on league settings and wide receivers.
Yeah. Completely.
Position of need, I should say.
Yeah, I agree. Next pick, man. This one, I wasn't sure how to feel about it, but I think I'm warming up to it. And it was at pick 20. Your Eagles selected my guy, Makai Lemon, wide receiver out of USC. Now, I mean, look, the first thing off the rip that everybody's going to say is Jalen Hurts doesn't pass over the middle. This is a terrible wasted pick. That's where, Makai Lemon is going to eat, and Jalen Hurts just isn't going to hit him. Look, I shared an article with you that I found last night that I enjoyed. There's a potential that this is a signaling of a new type of offense there, of course, with Sean Mannion, the new offensive coordinator, once again for your Philadelphia Eagles, calling plays there. And I love the compliment piece of getting Eli Stowers in the second round. Are they going to battle for kind of those targets over the middle of the field? Yeah, potentially. But I think that Makai Lemon could just win in a variety of ways. I don't think that he's relegated only to the middle of the field because he's just a slot only player. You know, the perceived narrative about him. I think that the dude's a dog. The question is going to be, how does he pair with Devontae Smith there in Philadelphia, who I believe is one of the best wide receivers in the NFL, talent wise. You know, fantasy it hasn't always hit because he's been playing with AJ Brown these last couple of years. But in terms of talent, I mean, Devontae Smith was a Heisman winner, and now you get the Biletnikoff Award winner for this season in Makai Lemon going to Philadelphia Eagles. So I'm personally warming up to it. It's not the landing spot that I would have hoped for, but it's a good team. It's a good environment. It's a winning culture. I think that he could step in and produce as a rookie. Of course, it's not as good as we wanted, right? I expected him to get top 10 draft cap. Honestly, the slide was a little weird to me. I don't know if it was the interview stuff or what came up throughout the draft process, but you mentioned it, man. In state there in Pennsylvania, they cucked the Pittsburgh Steelers, like Makai Lemon on the phone with them, thinking that, and then his agents coming to him and saying, "Hey, Philadelphia just traded for you." You know, I just loved it, man.
He said, "Why is Philly calling me?" while he's on the phone with Omar Khan. Yeah, that was brutal for the Steelers. But again, I think they might have been saved by themselves or from themselves, because I think Jeremy Bernard, who we'll talk about in a bit, is a better fit for them anyway. I don't think that they needed to waste first round draft capital on a wide receiver after, you know, DK Metcalf, who I don't think will be there long term, but he's going to be there this year. They traded for Michael Pittman. They gave both of those guys extensions after they traded for him. Makai Lemon didn't really make a lot of sense, even though he's a nice fit in the slot there with those two guys on the outside. But I don't know that they needed to spend first-round draft capital on a wide receiver at that point. So getting a tackle is good for them, especially with all the issues with Broderick Jones. Makai Lemon in the Eagles, I obviously am an Eagles fan. I love this for the Eagles. I love this fit. And like you said, it might signal that they're going to change up their offense a little bit compared to what we've seen in the past. And they're really going to let Hurts prove that he's worthy of being the quarterback that I know he can be. But he gets a lot of hate from a lot of the media and a lot of the fans out there who doesn't think that he's an overall good passer of the ball. And I get that too. So this is an opportunity for him to prove that he can throw a little bit more across the middle of the field with an absolutely great target. The real question is, they don't have any big wide receivers, right? Smith and Makai Lemon are both pretty undersized. So it'll be very interesting to see how that plays out in the long term. I do think that flying under the radar is Hollywood Brown, who's going to probably be their flanker if they trade AJ Brown, which we all expect, you know, come June 1st. But Hollywood Brown might have a little bit of some upside, especially in best ball formats as the flanker, you know, running those deep routes while these other guys do their work across the middle of the field on some cutting routes. So Lemon, I think this isn't the greatest landing spot, obviously. Last I checked, he was going wide receiver 22 on KTC. If you can trade wide receiver 22 value for Makai Lemon at this point, I might consider taking it, or if you could potentially get a 27 first. But I don't hate this long term for him. The real question is, as we talked about, Stowers being there too. It's like Stowers is basically just a slot receiver too, right? So they really are going to have to use Lemon in creative ways, getting him outside more, which we did see them do this year at USC. But if Stowers is more or less the de facto slot in some scenarios, then Lemon's going to have to do a little bit more as well. So this will be a way for both him and Jalen Hurts to showcase their overall talent moving forward as they both diversify their profiles. So exciting spot. You know, not necessarily the best for fantasy. I'm happy about it as an Eagles fan. A guy who I didn't like, as most people know, coming into this year was Casey Conception, and he went to the Browns at 24 as our next offensive player off the board. I could squint and like it, right? You know, even as a hater, I'm like, well, it's not great. It's the Browns. As soon as you hear the Browns, you're upset. But Todd Monken's there now. This could be their version of Zay Flowers. So you could say, well, there's going to be some decent, you know, passing volume there for him, targets funneled to him. And then, of course, very shortly thereafter, they took Denzel Boston as well, which really just killed me, man, because I love Boston. Boston was my wide receiver 4. So I guess we could kind of talk about both of those guys at the same time right now. But Conception, it's like I'm back to being a hater, right? There's just too many. There's not a quarterback. There's not somebody who's going to throw the ball to them very well, at least. And now he's got Boston to contend with, especially in the red zone. So in PPR formats or in tiered PPR, where maybe wide receivers get more points than other positions, maybe not the worst landing spot, but they need to get creative the way that they use him at this point.
Yeah, man. This one hurt me because, as you know, we were on opposite ends of the spectrum with this guy. I love Casey Concepcion. He was my wide receiver 4 of this draft class. Absolutely brutal spot. And like you said, you can squint and like it. I felt myself hyping this one up and just wanting it to work out. And, Todd Monken, man, when he was with Jameis Winston, it was like an air raid offense, just chucking it down the field. That's what he's going to do. I don't know what they're going to do. I think obviously this is potentially a long-term play. If you believe in the talent, if you can get him, at the 110, I think that's where he went in the draft that I did last night. I'm comfortable paying that price. But beforehand, he was looking like, the easy button at 1.6. And now he's gone down a little bit. And like you said, they also drafted Denzel Boston. And it's going to be interesting to see how this offense works, how they complement each other. I really want to see the route concepts that they have them run. I'm thinking that Casey Concepcion is going to be, over the middle of the field, the intermediate stuff, kind of like how he was used his freshman season at NC State, a little shorter 8-out stuff, get him the ball in his hand, which can be fantasy relevant. Whereas I think Denzel Boston is going to be more of that vertical contested catch situation, red zone type of player, which is how he was in college too. So they can complement each other well. It's just going to come down to the quarterback, of course. And Cleveland Browns, while they might have a very, very full quarterback room, I'm just not sure about the talent. Deshaun Watson, very rusty at this point. He hasn't played football really in forever. He's been hurt. Obviously, the off the field stuff. Then you got Shedeur Sanders, who had some good moments last season, but I think that he's limited as an NFL player as well. Dylan Gabriel. Hell, they drafted Taylor Green in this draft. So, very full room. I think that it's just a product of an organization that is constantly going through these regime changes. There's no stability in that team. So maybe, best case scenario would be Todd Monken solidifies this team. He's the coach of now and going forward, and he could really build this team. But that's a lot of hope and that's a lot of projection. So for me, it hurts, man. I might have to pass on Casey Concepcion in some drafts, but if I could get him at a value, 110, 111, easy for me. 106, where I think that these rookie drafts are going to begin, it's a little tougher because I think that there's some other guys who we're going to talk about very shortly that are probably better options if you're looking for year one production on your teams. And look, that Makai Lemon pick at 20 for your Eagles started to run on quarterbacks. You had Casey Concepcion at 24. Then we see Omar Cooper Jr. here at 30, who's another guy that we both really liked. Went to the Jets, another team that it's like not a very good ecosystem, right? It's not very good for these wide receivers.
Yeah, absolutely. Omar Cooper is kind of like the polar opposite of Tyson in some ways, right? Like he's a yak machine. So I don't necessarily hate this landing spot overall as far as he pairs with the other wide receivers in the room and Garrett Wilson and Adonai Mitchell. I think this puts a little bit of dampener on A.D. Mitchell's overall ceiling now, and he was really, really phenomenal at the end of the year, honestly. So he was a pick where if you were still holding on to him after the trade to the Jets, you were happy that you had him, and now maybe you're not so happy at this point because Omar Cooper's coming in here with great draft capital, and they're going to find ways to get him the ball. And Garrett Wilson, this puts a little bit of a question mark on his long-term standing with the Jets. I think we've already kind of thought maybe that they'd move on from him at some point. I expect him to be there this year, but I don't know that he's going to be there forever. But Omar Cooper landing with the Jets, don't love it. Again, this hurts Kenyon Sadiq a little bit as well because there's just a lot of mouths to feed. And Geno Smith's the one who's feeding them at this point, right? So I know that they also drafted Cade Klubnik, and whatever you think about Cade Klubnik long-term, I'm not like super a believer. We'll see what can happen in the long term there, but they might need to address the quarterback situation in 2027 in the draft again as well. But Omar Cooper landing at least with good capital, which is what we hoped for. Not the greatest landing spot, but there's really no reason to put a dampener on his overall ceiling. I think that he can still be the player that we thought he could be long-term. And because he is such a yak machine, as long as you get him the ball, he's going to find ways to get extra yardage. So there's still a lot of opportunity for him here. Hopefully that they can find good ways to get him the ball with all these mouths to feed and let him showcase what he can do. And Frank Reich isn't a terrible offensive coordinator, right? He knows what he's doing back there. He won a Super Bowl with my Eagles. So very excited about him being a creative overall offensive mind and getting these guys the ball. It's just the question on a week-to-week basis, who's going to be the guy who makes the biggest splash plays. Moving on to the very last pick of the first round. This is probably the biggest riser in all of Dynasty Land at this point because Jadarian Price got selected, and he set a new record because the first 2 running backs in the draft have never been from the same school. But him and Love were the only 2 running backs taken in the first round. And he went to the Seahawks, who very desperately needed some running back help after Kenneth Walker signed with the Kansas City Chiefs. So Jadarian Price, one of my comps for him was Kenneth Walker. I think that they're just going to plug and play. It's a new offensive staff there, of course, with Clint Kubiak leaving. But I think that they're going to basically use him exactly that they did with Kenneth Walker, which is good and bad, right? We know the highs and the lows of the Kenneth Walker experience in Seattle. And Zach Charbonnet is still there, but he's hurt. I don't know when he's coming back. It's not going to be early in the season. They have Emmanuel Wilson there as well, who they signed this year, who I was excited about as a little bit of a sleeper this year, but obviously not at this point. So it's basically wheels up for Jadarian Price because there's a lot of targets and touches waiting for him in that backfield that have been vacated by Kenneth Walker leaving for Kansas City.
Yeah. I wasn't sure how to feel about this. I think that I've warmed up. I think I had to take some of my bias out of the pick because Jadarian Price is very talented, and obviously the NFL really loves him. I think that he was, an early day 2 type of guy. I don't really like the first round draft capital, but Seattle Seahawks kind of pigeonholed themselves into this situation. They absolutely needed a running back, and picking at 32, they weren't gonna be able to make a selection for a while. So I do understand it from a process point there. And hey, you could do a lot worse than a guy who can run with power and speed. So very excited about Jadarian Price. I've warmed up to him a lot. I think that he's likely the guy that you see taken at 106 now. I think that that's probably going to be consensus here very soon. So that concludes the first round, Chris. And we had a couple guys in round 2. The start of the day 2 of the NFL draft was not what we expected. And it started with a banger, a surprise. The San Francisco 49ers, again, just reaching on players. I don't know. John Lynch mentioned using AI for these drafts. And so the big joke has been like, did you just let AI draft for you? Like at pick 33, right? Top of the second round, they picked the guy that we all expected them to, Dejon Stribling out of Ole Miss. I mean, there was Denzel Boston right there. There was still Jeremy Bernard on the board. If you wanted a wide receiver, I think that there was guys that profile better. Like if you really wanted Stribling, you could have gotten him later. He's not a guy that I've watched a lot of film on, but I watched a lot of Ole Miss last season. He's a traits guy, and maybe they can develop him into something. But I think that this was just an example of the hubris that we've seen from a team that has consistently reached on players. This is the same team that traded up to get Trey Lance at 3rd overall in the draft. Every year they draft a running back high, on day 3 or day 2, excuse me. So I'm just confused by the process. If they hadn't hit on Brock Purdy late, this team would be in some serious trouble. So did you have any thoughts on Stribling, or do you want to?
No, I mean, this is one of the biggest risers in the offseason we've ever seen from a fantasy point of view. I mean, he got steamed up for out of nowhere, and I thought he was an intriguing play. If he ended up with like round 3, round 4 capital, he's going to get overdrafted at this point, because of this landing spot alone at 33 overall, and because the Niners obviously could use a little bit of wide receiver help. We had been wish casting KC Concepcion there. I even said I would be way on board, even as a hater, if he had landed there in the first round. That didn't happen. They traded back a few times and had the first selection in day 2. And they took a guy who is undoubtedly a reach. John Lynch is not a good GM. Like, he doesn't draft very well at all. Like you said, he got extremely lucky with Brock Purdy. And that was after they did all that hubbubaloo with trading up for Trey Lance and, kind of hamstringing themselves a little bit as well. So they got lucky on Purdy, but he's a terrible draft. Just look at all the people he's drafted, not even just on offense, but if we're talking specifically just wide receivers that he's taken pretty early, guys like Jalen Hurd, Dante Pettis, Danny Gray, like these are all guys who are not good. And for that reason, I'm just fading Stribling because it feels like a reach, and it probably is a reach. He doesn't know what he's doing out there. However, I will say, because of the Stribling selection, Pearsall might be a little bit of a value now. And I'm not like a huge Pearsall guy either, but if we see a little bit of an ADP dip from Ricky Pearsall, I'm going out to get him, man, because there's an opportunity there for him to be the wide receiver 2 behind Mike Evans, and maybe they're projecting Dejon Stribling to be more of a long-term replacement for Evans. I'm not really sure. But yeah, this was ugly, man. Next up, we had Denzel Boston at 39 to the Browns. We already kind of talked about him, so we don't need to go over him too well. Decent red zone target, just a sad landing spot 47th overall, we got Jeremy Bernard, who I talked about just a little bit earlier ago. I think this was a fantastic pick for the Steelers. I was actually on the live stream with FSAN while this was going on, and I was saying, man, I think they traded up for this pick maybe, and I was saying I really hope that the Steelers select Jeremy Bernard here because I think he's a fantastic fit with the way that they're running the offense. You know, he can play outside, but he can also play in the slot, and it looks like he's going to be the primary slot receiver and in Pittsburgh. And I think this was a fantastic pick. He plays the game extremely well. He's very likable. He's a hard-hitting guy. You know, he's well-rounded. He's got that Steel City mentality, so he's going to be an instant fan favorite in Pittsburgh. I absolutely love this pick. I think that the overall projection was that he was a high floor player, not really a high ceiling player. And that's exactly what I expect out of him here in Pittsburgh. I never thought that he was going to be, you know, an absolute elite talent blowing up week to week. But I think this is a great place for him to have a nice safe floor to be in your wide receiver 3 slot or in a flex position for you in fantasy. And I love this landing spot for him.
Yeah, absolutely love it. Like you said, he's a good culture fit too for that team. It really fits the city. We love Jeremy Bernard here. But after that, we saw in round 2 a run on tight ends. A lot of them were blocking tight ends. I'm not even going to get into them because they're not going to be fantasy relevant. But one guy that was my pre-draft tight end one, Eli Stowers. Of course, we talked about him a little bit going to your Philadelphia Eagles. I think that it's a really good long-term play. Again, I think that this is signaling of a new era in Philadelphia. They're going to have to be a little more creative. And of course, we all know that was the big gripe on the offense last season was just the real lack of creativity involved. If you have these dynamic playmakers, utilize them, right? And of course, you have to get buy-in from both the offensive coordinator and your quarterback. So hopefully we see that this season, Eli Stowers is tremendously talented, athletic. And in terms of athletic testing, he wasn't that far behind Kenyon Sadiq, and his production profile was much better. I think that he's just a gifted wide receiver. He could be utilized like a wide receiver in this offense. So excited to see if they can get creative with him. And again, after that, it was just a run on tight ends that we're not even going to get into, including the Rams taking Max Clare, who I liked, but now that room includes Tyler Higbee, Terrence Ferguson, Colby Parkinson, and now Max Clare. So just like, what are we doing there in California? I don't know, man. Between the Rams and the 49ers, just very, very confusing draft. But at the top of the 3rd round, we had the Cardinals go ahead and take Carson Beck. So this was the 3rd quarterback taken off the board, and the first one since round 1. And this is a guy who gets a lot of heat. I don't really like him as a player overall, but you can't discount the experience. And I think that he's a good schematic fit for what Mike LaFleur wants to do. It's going to be a pro-style offense, which Beck has a lot of experience going back to his time at Georgia under the Mike Bobo offense. You know, he was the only quarterback in this class that had a lot of experience under center. And I think that with how NFL offenses are going back to the old school, you know, heavier personnel under center, keeping condensed formations, a lot of the same formations and a lot of play actions off of those, I think that he's a good fit for this. And if there was a situation where Jacoby Brissett goes down, Carson Beck can come in and at least get you some wins. Now, from a fantasy perspective, I don't think that he's a guy that's really worth much of anything. Again, it's going to take injury for his value to skyrocket. And maybe if you want to roster him on your taxi squad, and if that situation presents itself, maybe you could trade him. But I don't think he's ever going to be the guy. The quarterback of the future is not on the roster yet. It's likely a position that they're going to attack in next year's draft.
Yeah, if you wanted to take Carson Beck in the mid to late 2nd round of rookie drafts this year, I wouldn't hold it against you because of the overall lack of value with those picks at this point. And you could project a time where he's getting some starts for the Cardinals this year, even maybe next year. But I completely agree. He's not the quarterback of the future. But I don't hate it overall because there's some opportunity in front of him. So, if Brissett's hurt or whatever, they went out and signed Minshew as well this year. On I think it was a 1-year, $6 million contract. So he's going to be most likely the quarterback too, but you never know. They might decide by the end of the year, we're just going to throw the rookie in there, see what he can do depending on how the offense is. This is still, we talked about it a bit with Love, a work in progress in Arizona. They're building something. They've cut ties with the old coaching staff. They've cut ties with Kyler Murray. They're in a rebuilding path, much like the Miami Dolphins are at this point as well. So long term, I don't think he's their quarterback of the future, but Carson Beck landing there, it's not terrible. So if you wanted to take him later in the 2nd round, why not? Give it a shot. He might get you some starts. Next up, we had Sam Roush and Oscar Delp. We talked about this crazy run of tight ends. These are both nothing burgers. Delp might have a little bit of an upside with going to the Saints, and Taysom Hill they use kind of as a weapon and not really much of a tight end. And Juwan Johnson, I think, has been a really good underrated tight end, especially for fantasy purposes. But he's a little bit older as well. So Delp, I think, has a tiny bit of receiving upside. He's a little bit more of a well-rounded tight end. I don't love this position for him. I don't hate it. In the middle of Roush and Delp, we had Antonio Williams at 71 overall to the Commanders. And I'm not like a huge Antonio Williams guy, but again, this guy's a riser at this point, right? Like I could see him start to creep into ADP in the first round of these dynasty drafts because of this landing spot. Deebo Samuel's unsigned. Terry McLaurin's old. They don't have anybody else really behind him, right? So Antonio Williams is going to have a lot of opportunity in front of him right off the bat to be the slot wide receiver and get a lot of targets in Washington.
Yeah, he's right now, he went 201 in this last draft, and I could easily see a scenario where, like you said, he gets steamed up and he's taken earlier. So I love it. I like Antonio Williams. I had him as my wide receiver 10, and I absolutely love this landing spot for immediate production and even his long-term outlook. But moving along, we can skip some of these guys. We saw Drew Aller go to the Steelers. I do like that fit. Jacoby Lane went to the Ravens. Chris Brazell went to the Panthers, excuse me. I'm not sure about that fit, man. You got Tet there. It might signal the end of Xavier Legette. There is some opportunity for him. I got to go do a more of a deep dive on that offense. I don't know how he's going to fit with Canales, but I did like Brazell. He just didn't get the NFL draft capital that I thought that he would. I thought scouts would like his size speed combination a little more, but there must have been something else that we don't know, or it's just a product of being with Tennessee. We won't know. Kalen Black, we talked about this a little bit, Chris, going in the third round to the 49ers. I don't know what the hell we're doing, right? You had Emmett Johnson on the board. You had plenty of other really good backs. And for Kalen Black, a guy that wasn't even invited, to the Senior Bowl, any of those places, I don't know, man. I just didn't see it with Kalen Black. I thought that he was a decent back, but getting this type of draft capital, it's just another addition to a long line of overdrafted running backs in day three. Day two.
Yeah, again, the Lynch is bad at drafting running backs too. Lynch is just a terrible drafter, man. So I didn't like this pick, especially as the third running back off the board. I thought that there was better depth at the running back position than this draft really gave credit for. A lot of these guys who we'll talk about as quick hitters towards the end landed in some decent spots, but Kalen Black did not, in my opinion. Obviously, Christian McCaffrey, you never know. He might get hurt, maybe. And potentially Kalen Black could solidify himself as the running back too there, but they still have Jordan James, who they drafted reasonably high last year as well. Isaac Orendo, who we've seen do reasonably well in short bursts whenever Christian McCaffrey wasn't on the field. I just don't love this pick because there's other running backs who I would have taken here over Kalen Black. So I'm just not too hyped up about it. At 84 overall, we had Ted Hurst, who went to the Buccaneers, which isn't a terrible spot for him because obviously Mike Evans left. Chris Godwin, again, he's getting a little bit up there in age. It is a bit of a crowded room. They have Jalen McMillan, who I really like. Ted Hurst getting third round capital was probably like the best we could have expected from him. He's been on a lot of people's radars as a potential sleeper, a guy that's been floating around people's wide receiver top 10s in this draft. And he did come from a non-Power 5 school, Power 4 school, which is always a question mark for me from these guys. They don't have a great success rate of translating to very high-end fantasy production. But this is one of the best possible places that you could have landed with him. And I know that the Buccaneers traded up for this pick as well. So they must like the guy. Baker Mayfield is a talented quarterback. We're finally seeing him come into his own. The wide receivers down there eat for fantasy purposes. So if he can get up to speed and really prove that he's an NFL worthy talent, there's a lot of opportunity for him moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. I love Ted Hurst. The absolute best possible outcome for him from a G6 guy, being able to be drafted in round 3 of the NFL draft. Absolutely love it. And the opportunity, as you discussed, is there. But just to kind of close this out, Chris, let's just go over some day 3 guys that we got to talk about. And I'll kick it off with my Denver Broncos selecting Jonah Coleman in the 4th round. And what a freaking steal that was. And just from a schematic fit, dude, like this has me so excited because Denver was missing a running back that could run in between the tackles and get those short yardage situations. We started seeing Bo Nix have to run the ball and ultimately lead to his broken ankle because we just couldn't get anything on the ground with a really good offensive line. That was the thing that was really concerning for me is Denver has one of the best offensive lines and they just couldn't get it done. And now Jonah Coleman comes in and he's going to be that long-term play. I wouldn't be surprised if he gets some burn year 1. Like I really love this fit. It sounds like Denver was in on him throughout the entire process, and he had a really good idea that he was going to be a Denver Bronco. He just does everything really. Like he could catch the ball out of the backfield. He was my running back 3 pre-draft, and with this landing spot, man, I was sitting on the clock at 112 in this last draft, coming off a championship, and I had to pick between Eli Stowers or Jonah Coleman. And I ultimately went with Eli Stowers. It was something I needed a little more in this team, but Jonah Coleman went immediately after him. And he might be a guy that continues to rise, even with, day 3 capital. It's not a death sentence for these running backs, but the opportunity that he's going to have on an ascending offense, it's really, really exciting, man. I think that he could be very, very productive in this system.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, day 3 capital, not great, but it was early day 3. Jonah Coleman's a guy we still like. I like the pairing with RJ Harvey. I think there's a decent thunder and lightning type capability there. Yes. I do think that he's going to get some opportunity here in year 1, but I didn't want to pass up day 2 without touching real quickly on my favorite pick of the draft, Chris Bell to the Dolphins. The only thing that I don't like about it is they drafted some guy named Caleb Douglas even earlier in that round at wide receiver as well. And Caleb Douglas is just, we don't even need to talk about that, but Chris Bell as a long-term play, obviously coming off an ACL. I loved that pick for them because I love his ceiling. I think he's a very talented type of wide receiver. I've comped him to Nico Collins before, and this is really going to help them as a guy coming off of an ACL tear as a rookie. It's going to help them do what they need to do best, which is tank for a year, right? Get him up to speed, let him learn the offense a little bit, and make sort of that long-term play that potentially Chris Bell could have a really high ceiling in Miami. But moving back to day 3, we talked about a little bit Cade Klubnik to the Jets. He might get some opportunity eventually. Geno Smith was awful last year. Elijah Surratt to Baltimore. Don't hate this landing spot for him, except for the fact that they already took Jacoby Lane, who we just touched on very briefly in the last round. What are your thoughts on Elijah Surratt to Baltimore?
It's I don't know how he's going to pair, right? They did draft Jacoby Lane earlier, like you said. I don't know. I wasn't really in on Elijah Surratt. I know some people were. He was very productive there for Indiana en route to a national championship. We'll see. A lot of it is going to depend on Lamar Jackson. In the red zone, he's always kind of targeted Mark Andrews. That's always kind of been his go-to target in those areas. We'll see if he can throw that back shoulder fade like Fernando Mendoza perfected. He could be. I think that he's got a little bit to work on, but he's a decent wide receiver. I just don't see it translating to high-end fantasy success. I think he might be a good depth piece for if you have injuries or need to slot somebody in. But ultimately, I just don't see him as like a transcendent talent. And I think that was reflected in how the NFL views him, where his counterpart got first-round draft capital in Omar Cooper Jr. But as somebody that I was really excited again, and not to just talk about my Broncos continually, but they killed day 3. And in round 5, they took Justin Joly, tight end out of NC State. And I just love this fit because he's going to be able to do what we wanted Evan Ingram to do. And he doesn't have to play right away. We still have Evan Ingram under contract, but he's just so good, man. He's not the best blocker, but he's decent enough, right? He's sprung a few big plays for NC State due to his blocking, and he's just a weapon as a receiver too. So I'm just excited to see how he's going to pair. Of course, having Jalen Waddle in the offense opens up a lot of things. It slots Cortland Sutton to more of his natural position. And now you can get some more targets over the middle of the field, which, like we talked about with Jalen Hurts, Bo Nix has struggled at times or just hasn't really thrown towards the middle of the field. So maybe if we get guys like this that we're able to scheme and get some of those easy looks, I love it. Absolutely love it. And then Evan Johnson, my running back 2 pre-draft, went in the 5th round to the Kansas City Chiefs. And of course, you got Kenneth Walker III there who just signed. He's probably going to get a dominant share of the touches. But something a lot of people aren't talking about is the return of Eric Bieniemy as the running backs coach for Kansas City. And they've talked ad nauseum about needing to protect Patrick Mahomes and getting the running game going. it's been very noted that since Patrick Mahomes has been the quarterback for the Kansas City Chiefs, they have not had a 1,000-yard rusher on that team. So, I mean, Kenneth Walker, at times he's struggled to really finish a full season. And I think that just naturally with Eric Bieniemy, they're going to want to run the ball a little more. And I love a running back in an Andy Reid system that can catch the ball. And outside of Jeremiyah Love, I think that Emmett Johnson was the best pass catching running back in this class. So I've hyped myself up a little bit over it. I mean, at first glance, you see Kenneth Walker and you're like, oh, he's dead. Like Emmett Johnson is just dead. But I think that there are avenues for him to have year one success. And I mean, the room around him really isn't that deep. So it's not crazy to think like Isaiah Pacheco isn't there anymore. They did draft Brashard Smith last season, but I think Emmett Johnson is more talented than him.
Yeah, I've heard through the rumor mill that Kareem Hunt is telling people he's going back to KC this year. So I know he remains unsigned, but that could be a thing. And I think we can kind of expect that to happen at this point. But I do like Emmett Johnson to there. I've warmed up to that a little bit more. I'm just going to go rapid fire real quick. Give me a 10-second response. Do you like Mike Washington round 4 to Vegas?
Hurt my soul, but Clint Kubiak, he's going to mix in the running backs and they're going to have a rotation. So, I mean, he might have some play, but fantasy relevance, man, it really hurts.
Yeah, it's tough for him. Skylar Bell, round 4 to Buffalo. People are going to love this one.
Feels like a Buffalo Bill wide receiver, man. You get him some easy work. He can be a vertical complement as well. I think he's a sneaky
He might
player.
be a little bit steamed up because of the landing spot, but I don't necessarily hate it because, again, there's not a whole lot that you want to do with these second and third round picks. Nick Singleton, I'll take this one because I love this guy, obviously. We expected the Titans to potentially take Love early in the draft, and they ended up with Nick Singleton in round 5. And he wasn't great. He wasn't even my favorite Penn State running back, but there's going to be a lot of opportunity for him in Tennessee. Absolutely. Tanner Koziol to Jacksonville in round 5.
I liked his profile. I liked some elements of it, but Jacksonville took like 12 other tight ends in this draft. I just don't know how he's going to pair.
Yeah, unfortunately. Taylon Green, round 6 to Cleveland. We already talked about him a little bit. He's got a little bit of fantasy upside if he gets on the field because of that running game, but he's just not a terribly good passer. So it seems like they've just added another quarterback who can't throw in Cleveland, unfortunately. Katron Allen, I just talked about him, round 6 to Washington. What do you think?
I love it. Early opportunity is there for him. I mean, that's a situation where he can really take over year one. Like
absolutely.
Early opportunity. I love it. Good system. Let's go.
Yeah, and I've always talked about him always having a role in an NFL offense because of his finishing ability as a red zone type of guy, and this is a really good pairing for him, even if they have a three-headed monster. If they got Bill running through the middle of the field and they use Rachaad White as more of their pass-catching back, he could still finish some drives for them, which is great. Damon Claiborne, round 6 to Minnesota. Love this one.
Yeah, I love the landing spot, man. I still have questions about his size, but dude's electric, man, and a lot of fun. It's a need to in a decent offensive system, let's go. He's going to get steamed up now in these drafts. Of course, he was very popular before, but I mean, Minnesota was a team that we were all looking for running back to go to.
Absolutely. Yeah. And Mason, like kind of a low key winner of the draft because they didn't take a guy higher than that. But I love the long-term outlook for Damon Claiborne and the opportunity there in Minnesota. Eli Heidenreich, round 7 to Pittsburgh. He was a guy who was getting a lot of steam as a good sleeper. He absolutely did it all at Navy. He was kind of a hybrid wide receiver, running back. He had over 1,000 receiving yards. I like this pick mostly just because Pittsburgh took him and he's from Pittsburgh. So it was kind of a cool full circle moment. Obviously, they have a little bit of depth at the running back room now, but depending on how they utilize him, if they can get him doing some of those slot routes and also doing some touches out of the backfield, he could be a fun little weapon, but not necessarily a fantasy superstar in the future. And then Deion Burks, round 7 to Indianapolis. I don't love it, but there's theoretically opportunity for him to be their slot guy, if that breaks out right.
Yeah, I mean, these guys taken in round 7, they're competing for roster spots right off the rip. They're going to be special teams contributors just to make the team. So, I mean, not a good bet to make for fantasy relevance, but if, you have deep rosters and some taxi spots, take the upside, but I don't project them to really do much of anything in the NFL.
Yeah, agreed. So that pretty much rounds it up. We touched on a lot of these guys that were fantasy relevant from the NFL draft. My real quick closing thoughts would be, we've talked about it a little bit, just sell picks if you can get any value, right? If you're at 106 or later and you could get a 27 first, just do it. Don't even worry about it, right? Just sell those picks. If you have need for a position and you could trade for a vet with some of these first, just do it. The second round is kind of boring. It feels like most years' third or fourth rounds at this point. There's some opportunity there with some of these sleepers that we just discussed. So it's really just, this draft feels like pick your guy. Just draft the guys that you like. And if you feel good about them, take them. Don't care what ADP says. Just grab whoever you feel like is worthy of it if you're not going to be trading your picks. Yeah, so that's going to conclude our discussion here on the 2026 rookie draft class. We appreciate you checking in. If you liked what you heard, please join our Devy Dojo Discord, which will be linked at the description of the bottom of this podcast. We're always in there talking ball with our friends, chatting about what's going on. It's a very active community, and we do have opportunities for mock drafts as well. And we also want to give a quick shout out to our friend Will Stone, who runs Blue Chip. Blue Chip is an up-and-coming fantastic platform to host both Devy and C2C leagues. And if you're in this listening to us because you like Devy, you like C2C, obviously we talked about just rookies today, but that's our primary purpose here is to talk about Devy. And this is going to be a platform that changes the game. So shout out to Will Stone and shout out to Blue Chip. We thank you guys for listening in today. Be sure to stay tuned for next week.
Boom.